Hey everybody, and welcome to part 6 of chapter 2. This time we are discussing the nervous and endocrine systems organization. Okay, first off, let's start with the actual sort of organization scheme that we use. The nervous system is basically just all the parts of your body that are made out of neurons, right? We can divide this into our central and peripheral systems. So central is what it sounds like. It's basically all of your nervous system that's encased in bone, so your brain and your spinal cord. Peripheral is everything else. The peripheral can be further subdivided into your autonomic and somatic nervous systems. Your somatic nervous system controls the voluntary movement of skeletal muscles. So basically every time you try to move a muscle on purpose, that's your somatic system working. Autonomic is control of self-regulated action in internal organs and glands, things that you can't control. This is further divided into your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Sympathetic is the sort of more active arousal system, whereas parasympathetic is the more calming system. Think of your sympathetic nervous system as governing your fight or flight responses, and your parasympathetic of governing your rest and digest responses. Let's look at this a different way using the flowchart from your book. Your nervous system is comprised of your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system, messages from to and from and within the CNS. We have the somatic and autonomic systems divided there. Somatic nervous system allowing you to control voluntarily your muscles and also transmission of sensory information from the periphery to your central nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls your involuntary bodily functions. Sympathetic, right, arouses body to expend energy. Parasympathetic calms body down to conserve energy. So that's how we organize, broadly speaking, our nervous system. Let's talk a little bit more about the division between sympathetic and parasympathetic. I have to take a moment to acknowledge the very, very bad art that has made it into the textbook. I can't get over it. I guess if this whole teaching thing doesn't work out for me, I can just go into making illustrations for Macmillan, because apparently you don't have to be good to do it. Okay, anyway, sympathetic nervous system. This is the sort of fight or flight type response. You encounter, let's say, something you're afraid of, like a snake. You're going to have a lot of responses happen. Your pupils will dilate. You might inhibit salivation within your mouth. Changes with your breathing rate, your heart, your palms become sweaty, inhibition of digestion. All this stuff is governed by your sympathetic nervous system in response to threat. You have to get that energy going and mobilize in response to that. Perhaps instead you've encountered a benign snake that will not hurt you, and you return to your sort of dull, glassy-eyed, normal expression where you're not afraid. You have the sort of opposite responses taking place, right? Diminishing of sweat, slower, deeper breathing, slowed heartbeat, stimulation of digestion. So you have these two opposed systems, branches of your autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic, fight or flight, mobilize energy to deal with threat. Parasympathetic, relax, conserve energy, everything's fine. Okay, let's talk a little bit about your endocrine system. So the endocrine system is basically your hormonal signaling system. Hormones are secreted by endocrine glands into the bloodstream, and the targets can be far from the origin. So with neurotransmission, when we're talking about releasing neurotransmitters, that happens very locally, right? The gap, the synapse is very, very small. So neurotransmitters travel only an extremely short distance to do their thing. Whereas with our endocrine system, hormones are released from the endocrine glands, and traveling through our vascular system, through our blood, can reach receptors in distant cells, right? So hormonal signaling is generally much slower, and it can take place over long distance. So what are our hormones, right? These are chemical messengers that are sent from endocrine glands and travel via the bloodstream. They regulate physical processes and influence behavior, influence emotional states and stress responses. They're closely linked to the central nervous system, and we'll talk about exactly how on the following slide. But they operate sort of via both being able to have hormones sent out by, or at least prompted they're sending out by the central nervous system, as well as our central nervous system being receptive to the level of hormones present. So that interacts in both directions. These can be chemically identical to neurotransmitters. In fact, certain chemicals are considered hormones in the periphery and neurotransmitters in the central nervous system that are identical. It's just a matter of where they are. The hypothalamus regulates the release of pituitary gland hormones. So the hypothalamus is a brain region that we're going to talk about later that is directly connected to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is often referred to as the master gland because of its rich connectivity to the endocrine system and its ability to exert influence over distant systems. Some common hormones released by the pituitary are growth hormones, prolactin, and oxytocin. So let's talk briefly through some of the major players in our endocrine system. So there's the pineal gland, which produces melatonin, really important for sleep-wake cycles. Descartes also famously theorized that this was the house of the soul. Jury is still out on that. We don't exactly know what brain region encapsulates the transcendent property of human experience, but Descartes thought pineal gland. Hypothalamus, this controls the pituitary gland and is sort of a link between the nervous system and the endocrine system, sort of an interface between the two systems. Pituitary regulates the activities of several other glands, produces growth hormones, prolactin, oxytocin, and among others. The thyroid controls the body metabolism rate. Adrenal glands produce epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, involved in the stress or fight or flight response. So a lot of the stuff we were talking about earlier with the autonomic nervous system is underlied by epinephrine, norepinephrine signaling arising from the adrenal glands. The pancreas helps regulate blood sugar and insulin levels. This is also involved in hunger with things like ghrelin. The ovaries and testes, sort of the sex organs, or rather not sex organs, but sort of sex-specific endocrine systems. Ovaries secrete estrogen and progesterone, which regulate female sexual development, reproduction, and influence sexual behavior, whereas the testes in males secrete testosterone, which regulates male sexual development, reproduction, and influences sexual behavior. So this is a quick overview of the major players in the endocrine system. All right, that concludes our discussion of the general layout of our central and peripheral nervous system as well as our endocrine system. Next time, we're going to get into talking about some neuroanatomy.